Anyway,
this sounds like an amazing episode of the podcast, and I demand that we watch all of these films and talk about
them. No way.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 47. I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by my dog fighters, Ebony Astor and Carolyn Pettit.
Pew, 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 pew.
I'm really into these sound effects.
I'm into these sound effects, but also this episode should be the episode where we debut our call signs, right? So in future, when you say, like, I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by, then it's our call signs.
But
you know?
I didn't think about what my call sign would be.
Right. Well, that's the thing. By the end of this episode, can we come up with call signs? Please.
Sure.
Okay.
That'll be the bonus episode.
Okay. Okay.
Can I finish the intro now?
Whatevs.
This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love, or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. Today's show is the long-anticipated, fist-pumping dissection of the iconic 1986 love story, Top Gun. This is the film that catapulted Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer into the celebrity stratosphere, and 3 decades later, we have this film to thank for Tom Cruise's refusal to go quietly into that good night. Does that mean death?
Mm-hmm.
No,
that's a little dark.
His career. His career.
After our discussion of Top Gun, if we have any breath of life left in our bodies, we'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out? Now on with the show. It's funny that I say now on with the show because the show basically starts when we start.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that funny?
I guess.
Hilarious.
Okay, so now I can't stop thinking about call signs. So we're gonna have to come up with some good ones for us.
Mm-hmm.
Some part of my brain is now working on formulating that. While
can you activate for mine as well?
No.
Oh, damn it.
No, I can't do that.
Yeah. So we are actually recording this episode a little bit early, which means we've already recorded one episode and we're already fatigued.
And why are we recording this episode early?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, Carolyn.
Yeah. Smooth.
As we speak, Ebony and I are on our book tour. Ebony, what is our book about?
It's about phenomenal, terrifying, remarkable women from history that you may not have heard of, but we think you'll be fascinated by.
So we are on the road.
We are on the road, not as we speak, but as you listen to this, we are on the road.
What's the difference, really?
Right now, as we are
is just a
speaking,
concept.
we are in the studio. That's the difference.
All right. So, Carolyn.
Yeah.
While we are not here,
Uh-huh.
please give us our entertainment news for the week.
You got it. Hello, everyone. It's Carolyn here, and I'm coming to you from the future for this week's entertainment news. Well, not your future, but the future of the Anita, Ebony, and Carolyn, who you're hearing in the main podcast. All right, so the biggest story in general of the past week, or one of the biggest certainly, was the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, a confirmation that raises the question, just what the hell does a privileged, cis, straight white man have to do to be considered maybe not quite Supreme Court material? Certainly, I am aghast that he was confirmed, given his absolutely boorish behavior during the inquiry. However, here we are. Now, you may be asking, okay, yes, that's a huge and horrifying story, but what does it have to do with the entertainment news? So, I'll tell you. On his blog, We Hunted the Mammoth, a blog that sort of documents MRA and alt-right behaviors across the internet, behaviors and trends and so on, David Futrell posted recently a story titled Mark Judge Gamergator. Kavanaugh pals creepy 2015 attacks on Anita Sarkeesian look even creepier in retrospect. So Mark Judge, if you don't know, is quote unquote allegedly, and I say quote unquote because I have no I fully believe Dr. Blasey Ford and her recollections of the event of her own assault. But nonetheless, he is the person who was in the room, who was sort of Kavanaugh's partner during the assault. So Mark Judge, it turns out, as Futrell writes, in July 2015, Kavanaugh's pal and alleged attempt rape assailant Mark Judge had written an article for a little-known, now-defunct culture blog called Acculturated, attacking Anita Sarkeesian and praising her Gamergate critics. But it doesn't stop there. Later, after Feminist Frequency released its Women as Reward entry in the Tropes versus Women in Video Games series, Judge wrote a specific rebuttal, I guess you could say, to that video, in which he sort of dismissed the very idea at the video's core by writing, quote, "So when guys play video games, they like to fantasize about enduring hardship and making it through difficult obstacles to be rewarded at the end or sooner with the attentions of a gorgeous, sexy woman. And this is a problem?" And as Futrell rightly asserts in his piece, yes, it's a huge problem if these guys have trouble seeing women as anything more than their bodies, and if they see these bodies as little more than prizes to be won. So it's often said by some that everything is Gamergate, everything comes back to Gamergate, that August never ends, and this is just another instance of that, of events of tremendous cultural import, national or global import, having some connection back to the events of Gamergate. I will link to the We Hunted the Mammoth post on this story in the show description. Moving on, within the past week, extremely famous actor, singer, performer Bette Midler gave us all a demonstration of peak white feminism when she tweeted the following. It begins with a quote, a John Lennon quote, which is, so the tweet reads in full, quote, "Women are the N-word of the world," end quote, "raped, beaten, enslaved, married off, worked like dumb animals, denied education and inheritance, enduring the pain and danger of childbirth and life in silence for thousands of years. They are the most disrespected creatures on earth." Now, I'm a huge John Lennon fan and admirer, but I have no doubt that the quote that Bette Midler references in her tweet was, well intentioned at the time. However, there's no reason for anyone to bring up to use that quote today, because it's tremendously problematic, as we say. People will often criticize certain feminists for enacting white feminism. And by that, they don't mean any feminism enacted by any white woman, but rather a particular kind of feminism that fails to acknowledge intersectionality and axes of privilege beyond just gender, right? White feminists tend to enact feminism in ways that erase or ignore the plights, the unique plights and struggles and issues faced by non-white women and other people. And this was, yes, just peak white feminism on Bette Midler's part, this tweet. Francesca Ramsey quote tweeted Midler's tweet with the following. She said, "No, because Black women exist. This is some white feminist bullshit, and it's disappointing AF. You don't get to co-opt a slur created to denigrate Black bodies as if we don't still deal with the consequences of that word." So, yes, to my fellow white women out there, let us never forget that while we absolutely experience misogyny and oppression along that axis, we still retain white privilege. And we have to absolutely bear in mind that there are other axes of privilege and oppression that exist, including but not limited to class and physical ability. So, don't make the mistake, please, that Bette Midler made. And finally, to conclude things here, I just want to encourage everyone to watch Lady Gaga's appearance on Colbert, in which so she's doing the rounds promoting her new film, A Star Is Born, which I've seen and quite enjoyed, and certainly thought her performance in it was exceptional. But on Colbert, she expressed her own dismay and outrage over the Kavanaugh confirmation, and also very vulnerably talked about the fact that she herself is a sexual assault survivor, and about the way that trauma works in the memory and in the body, such that Dr. Blasey Ford's recollections of the event are totally consistent with how trauma works and how a person would process or handle or cope with such a traumatic experience. All right, so that is going to do it for this week's entertainment news. Going to send you back over to Anita, Ebony, and Carolyn from the past. Until next time, keep it off the record, on the QT, and very hush hush.
And now for the main topic of the week, Top Gun. Top Gun is the epic 90s film from 1986. Did
It's
I say
not
90s?
a 90s
Shit!
film. It's from
I
1986.
literally was, I wrote 90s, and I literally was like, okay, just change it when you say it out loud. Okay, I'm going to start that again, and Phil can cut all this out, or not. Everyone can see my true colors.
Shining through. I see
I'm
your
okay
true...
with never listening to Cyndi Lauper again.
What?
Is that okay? Can I say that?
No.
I guess, but she's cool. I'm
kind of over it.
Don't you like Time After Time?
I'm kind of over it.
No.
How at what point did you hit this like Cyndi Lauper ceiling? Like I haven't heard a Cyndi Lauper
literally
song
a week
in
ago,
forever.
I was in a restaurant and Cyndi Lauper was playing, and I was like, I don't ever need to hear this again.
It was one song, and you were like, "That's it, I'm done."
One song for my entire life.
I mean,
I've listened to Cyndi Lauper a lot, and I'm kind of like, meh.
Also, I like her cover of "When You Were Mine." I'll throw that
I
out
don't think
there.
I've ever heard that.
Oh. I'm sure I have, but I can't remember. I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan.
I like her.
Also, I saw her play at Pride once, and she was really drunk, and I think that kind of ruined it for me a little bit.
That's unfortunate,
so.
but apparently
Anita is dropping all kinds of bombshells in this this episode. This episode just got elevated to like my top 3 that we've done.
You mean Top Gun is the top 3 episode?
Good night, everybody, and that's our show. Oh, boy.
Okay, Top Gun is from 1986. Yeah. It's directed by Tony Scott, who Ebony has just informed us is the younger brother of Ridley Scott, which I care.
Good.
I don't know
People
why.
should care.
It's a fun fact. It stars Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer. And the film follows Tom Cruise's character as he joins Top Gun, the elite training program for aerial combat. Okay, y'all, this movie is not good.
Well,
wait,
okay.
What?
Hold on. But
I just said it.
So in the intro, you described it as a love story.
That's because Ebony wrote that shit.
Okay.
Yes,
but let's talk about that.
Totally.
Because,
talk about that.
What is it like? What is the central relationship in this film? The central relationship in this film is Maverick and
Val Kilmer's Iceman.
Iceman.
Now, see, I would argue that it's Maverick and Goose, but okay.
Well,
yeah.
But I mean,
there's not the sexual, like, so I went and watched a bunch of slash vids because there's some really good ones of Maverick and Iceman, like the homoerotic sort of like undertones of this film are strong.
Yeah. I mean, they are both. So I mean, I think that there is really interesting things. I agree, it's not a good film, but I think that. Tony Scott had a real sense of visual style, so I think there are some amazing shots in this film. But also, like, more importantly, in Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer in 1986, you have 2 actors who are like absolute masters of coming across as like so cocky and arrogant, and like seeing them pit their arrogance against each other. The way that they both like smile in that way that's just so self-absorbed and self-obsessed. It is like fascinating to watch.
And the film congratulates them and supports them in their estimation of themselves, right? Like, if anything, this film says, yeah, these guys have a right to be arrogant and to be cocky.
I couldn't get over, did I write this down? They all kind of look like constipated plastic dolls.
You're looking through the lens of 2018 goggles, Anita. In 1986, this was the height of masculinity.
Val Kilmer kept doing these like really weird like facial and hand expressions that I was like, oh, he's like playing a joke or he's gonna do, but like no, he just kept like moving his mouth and face in weird ways, and I was like, what the fuck is happening here?
I mean, but I found that I really found that fascinating. Like I think in the first scene where we see him, maybe the first scene. So at Miramar at Top Gun, you know, you have Maverick, Tom Cruise, in like the front row, and over his shoulder to the left, you know, back a row or two, is Iceman. And Iceman is just like, all he's doing is like spinning this pen around on his hands, on his fingers. And like, but there's just something about like even just that gesture, and like because of the look on his face as he's doing it, it just reeks of like supreme self-absorption.
See, okay, so in that scene, Maverick, Tom Cruise's character, is like turning around and looking at him. They have not established at all why he would be literally turning around in the middle of a lesson to look at this one guy, right? Like, there's no... So, okay, when Ebony proposed this, she proposed it as an episode about like frenemies, and we were gonna potentially talk about Point Break as well. And Point Break is a movie that I love and I've rewatched a bajillion times. And as I was watching Top Gun, which I have seen before, I just kept being like, what is the difference between these two movies? And to me, like, I'm not going to watch Top Gun 5,000 times because to me, it is so badly done. Like, it doesn't set up emotions. It doesn't set up character. The acting is garbage. Like, there's nothing about it that pulls me in. And the mood swings of this movie don't make any sense to me. Whereas, where I will also admit on a personal level, I fucking have mega hots for Patrick Swayze, but I also think that Patrick Swayze is like really, really charismatic, where I don't understand the fame of Tom Cruise. Like, I don't find him attractive. I don't find him charming. I don't think he's that great at like...
yeah.
So it's hard for me to like this movie because I don't feel like anyone is holding it up.
I agree. I mean, I certainly agree. Point Break is an infinitely better film. Patrick Swayze brings a complexity and sincerity to that film that both Maverick and Iceman are these hollow, superficial figures, and the whole film it's basically like one long music video. It is pure style over substance. It's hard to even pinpoint what the main conflict in this film is, because I mean, I guess it's like Maverick versus himself. Like, will he learn to rein in his reckless tendencies such that he can actually be the pilot that he needs to be? Because like the stuff with the MiGs that they encounter from time to time, like, that's not developed at all. It's just, oh, we have a crisis situation, the MiGs are here, how convenient. Like, it's an opportunity for Maverick to fly. Like, there's no real developed kind of through line conflict or anything.
I just kept being like, they're at school.
Yeah, they're
like, I'm like, they're just at school. Not that there isn't drama at school, and not that you don't like care because it's, whatever. But I just kept being like, so I don't understand why anyone cares about anything right now.
I could not disagree with the two of you more. I think this is a phenomenal action film. I'm being completely serious here. I think this is a phenomenal action film. And while I would not, remotely try to suggest that this film is healthy for one, it's not a salubrious thing for young people to watch. I found this film phenomenally assured as an example of its genre. I think the action genre has, progressed by leaps and bounds since 1986. So this film is incredibly dated, but maybe because it hit the sweet spot of nostalgia for me, I was all the way in. And I think one of the things that I did not care about when I was a kid watching this film, but as an adult rewatching it, who cares, right? It's Tom Cruise. And a young Tom Cruise is the least interesting Tom Cruise you could have. But I was like, I am more interested in the idea of a younger man and an older woman in a romantic relationship. I don't care about this particular pairing, but the idea of it is great because that's something we get very rarely, right? And I love the way the film is, I think, deliberately a parody of itself. You could not satirize Top Gun any more than it already satirizes itself. I think like the kind of over-the-top, pursed lips, super self-serious acting of both Tom Cruise and especially Val Kilmer is deliberately done because that is what's necessary to convey what the military has bred into a certain type of dude.
Yeah, but we can sort of maybe recognize that on some level, but we also have to remember and recognize that like this film, on some level, it served essentially as like a Navy recruitment tool.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like it makes all these, and I admit, like I find it again, like I think Tony Scott has a sense of style. I find the opening images of the flight crew on the deck of the aircraft carrier kind of silhouetted and the plane silhouetted as that Harold Faltermeyer synth score plays. Like I find that somewhat stirring. I find like the kineticism of images of like Tom Cruise on his motorcycle, like somewhat
without a helmet,
rebel. Like you're very irresponsible, somewhat stirring. And so like, yeah, I think it's a very effective film. But okay, so the relationship with the older woman, I actually have a few things I want to say about that. First of all, Maverick is such a petulant child. Like his pride is so wounded over what she says in the classroom. And then she has to like run to him and tell him like, I actually think you're like a super amazing pilot.
That
I just couldn't
made me so mad.
Yeah.
Where she's like racing through traffic to like catch up with him.
Yeah.
Ugh.
But also like I want to share this. So, when he reviewed Days of Thunder a few years later, which is essentially like Top Gun only NASCAR.
That's the one with Nicole Kidman.
That's the one.
I kept being like, "Why? Who's this blonde? Where does Nicole Kidman get here?"
Yeah.
I was
so
confused.
When he reviewed that, Roger Ebert really insightfully identified it as what he called another example of the Tom Cruise picture. Since it assembles most of the same elements that worked in Top Gun, The Color of Money, and Cocktail. So you have in all of these films, this was a pattern. You have Tom Cruise as a young and naive but naturally talented kid who could be the best if only he could tame his rambunctious spirit. You have the mentor, an older man, who has done it himself and has been there before and knows talent when he sees it. So like maybe the Tom Skerritt character in Top Gun. The superior woman, usually older, taller, and more mature than the Cruise character, who functions as a mentor for his spirit while the male mentor supervises his craft. You have the craft, be it making cocktails, flying fighter jets, driving cars, whatever, playing pool. All these elements, including what he calls the proto-enemy, which is like the bad guy in the opening reels of the movie who provides the hero with an opponent who, at first, the Cruise character and the proto-enemy, obviously Iceman in this case, dislike each other, but eventually, through a baptism of fire, they learn to love one another. Anyway,
this sounds like an amazing episode of the podcast, and I demand that we watch all of these films and talk about
them. No way. Anyway, it's fascinating that absolutely is the formula of all of these young Tom Cruise movies from that period.
Yeah, what we talked about last week in regards, especially in the bonus, in regards to like watching older films and seeing how they represent gender and race and that sort of thing. Like, you know, from the very beginning of this film, you know, so just talking about like women in the film as opposed to like masculine gender, which there's a lot to talk about here, masculine identity. You know, the Goose and Maverick walk into a bar and, you know, one of them says, "This is what I call a target-rich environment." And then one of them is like, they make a bet about like, Goose makes a bet with Maverick that he needs to have like carnal knowledge of a lady on the premises.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when he like, you know, like just phrases like that, they're not, there's no judgment of that. That is just how dudes are. And that is acceptable and okay in this environment to be that way. It gets reinforced because he's rewarded with it, right? The woman that he hits on, who, by the way, he hits on her. She's like, "I'm with someone else." Then he goes into the bathroom and is practically on top of her, which is terrifying. I was so uncomfortable watching that. And then later she walks in and she's like the woman that the, you know, has top clearance with the Pentagon and knows all the shit and is basically his superior, that like she falls in love with him, right? And so he gets rewarded for being this sort of macho, you know, bullshit hotshot guy.
Totally. And Goose, in setting up that bet, he says, you know, you have to have carnal knowledge with a lady this time.
Yeah.
So it's a joke. It's like a homophobic joke. Like, oh, your last time, you know.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, suggesting jokingly that last time Maverick, you know, hooked up with a dude or something as a. So yeah.
And so then like she's really so that woman and then Meg Ryan's character, who's the wife of Goose, are really the only other women with speaking parts at all.
Yes.
And like, you know, she is there, like she's literally there to inflate Maverick again, even though she's the wife of Goose. And so she says to the teacher chick, Charlie, that like he's one of the best people she knows and blah 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 blah, and insinuating that like she'd be lucky to be dating him and should be happy with him and all of this shit. And I'm like, oh my God, your role literally is to just say that like your friend's friend is good.
Yeah, and the
And,
whole
sorry.
No.
And then also when we find out that Goose dies and Maverick goes to her, she says he liked flying with you. It was always about him, even though like she and her child are now alone.
She's comforting him like when he should be like comforting her. I know. It's Maverick is so, the whole world of the film revolves around him. But what I found particularly amusing watching the film this time that I hadn't, of course, thought about before is how perfunctory the Charlie romance subplot is. It exists. It feels as if it exists purely to to challenge any notion that the film might at its core be gay or homoerotic, right? Because you have the big, you know, moment on the flight deck at the end with like Goose and Iceman, and obviously that is the payoff of the film's central conflict and central kind of relationship, right? Is Goose and Iceman finding some kind of understanding with each other. You can be my wingman anytime. No, you can be mine. It's very, it has some kind of, romantic undertones to it almost. And so then we have to get this like scene tacked on at the very end with Charlie again, where Charlie comes back from Maverick just to be like, no, don't, he's straight. And the main thing is this relationship he has with this woman. But of course the film doesn't really care too much about that relationship.
Yeah, whenever Maverick is disrespected in the film, there is always a scene immediately afterwards where he is then validated by Charlie, and it's very interesting because this happens in other movies too, that, if a man is disrespected by another man, he must be shown to then win over or dominate in some way a woman. And this happens time and again in this film. And I think, one of the reasons for Charlotte's inclusion, which, by the way, I read, and I'll make sure we include the link in the show description about the real life woman who was the basis for the character of Charlotte, this astrophysicist who worked with the Department of Defense to do what Charlie does in this film. Like, I didn't know that was a real person, and she is. But also the way that women in this film are positioned as a gender, as civilians, right? And men are non-civilians. And so the way that these dudes in the Navy talk about civilians and talk about women in this very patronizing way to suggest like they don't know what it takes for us to do what we do. And they will never know. And it's imperative that we keep these sort of manly secrets from them. And so, yeah, I mean, you're never going to get me to hate this movie, but there are some really horrible things that the way the film uses Charlotte and kind of deploys her as a way of, you know, advancing these kind of messages.
There is, so the, you know, last week I talked a little bit about the institution of like law enforcement, but and the emotionlessness of it, how it drives any ability to feel anything other than anger or rage. And the same goes for the military. And there's a scene that sticks out for me where Maverick's boss.
Do you mean at the school or
at the school? Yeah.
So there's Michael Ironside, Viper, or there's Tom Skerritt.
Tom Skerritt's character.
Okay.
No, Tom Skerritt is Viper. Michael Ironside is Jester.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And also, are we working on our call signs as we discuss this?
Totally.
Okay.
I just thought of a really dumb one. Okay. What the fuck am I saying? Oh, so Goose dies.
Spoiler alert. Make sure you put a spoiler alert before that, Phil.
So Goose dies, and Viper comes in and says, people die. Deal with it. It's fine. Let him go. Let him go. And you're like, what the fuck is going on here? And that's part of when I was like, oh, I'm supposed to feel like the feelings are supposed to be happening, right? Like the film doesn't elicit the deep emotion of losing your partner and like the progress from there forth. So I'm still laughing at how goofy this movie is and then going, oh wait, it's supposed to be serious now? Oh, like, and then it just it wasn't really good at grounding that. And so not only did I think this scene was like awkward in its emotionality, but also like there wasn't a sense that like, oh, what Viper's saying is wrong, that like Maverick should be given time to grieve, that he needs to like, you know, whatever, feel and take some time off, and like the loss of his best friend and partner is a huge deal. And this guy's just like, people die, whatever, you'll get over it. It happened to me in Nam, so you're fine. And then he's like, you know, then you see these scenes where they're like, just get him back up there. And then like, you know, which was obviously too early to do. And he froze, which was another climactic emotional moment for him to have to work through and blah, blah, blah. And so I think that the way that masculinity in this is portrayed is very, very traditional. It's very like, you know, They set up the competition at the beginning, and they're like, oh, remember your competition here, but in the future you're all working together, as if that's not going to like create lasting ruptures between people in that competition.
Well, right. But yeah, though the way the film sees it is that in that baptism of fire that is like the actual conflict, that's what brings Goose, Iceman and Maverick together.
Fuck that shit.
But yeah, that's like not brotherly, male bonding,
right?
Is like,
well, so here's a question. They graduate.
Yeah.
And then they get sent off to the ship that he was on.
We have a crisis situation. You have to go right now.
Yeah, you just graduated from this thing and you have to go do this because there's nobody else more qualified.
Weirdly convenient timing.
What? Who are they fighting? They just keep talking about the MiGs, which is
in the Indian Ocean. Yeah, MiGs in the Indian Ocean.
But like
over the Indian Ocean.
Who the fuck is the U.S. government shooting out of the sky in 1986?
Bad guys.
Yeah, Russians. Equals
that's
the
why
bad guys.
They have a red star on their helmets or something.
God, Anita, get with it.
Literally the whole time I was like, who the fuck are we fighting?
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. The film does not give a fuck. It's just
they're just fucking Red Baron.
They're
Who
just
cares?
fodder. They're just like okay. Top Gun is a movie, sometimes critics...
It really is a recruiting movie. Like, that's really what it feels like.
And it worked that way very well. But, critics still sometimes will disparagingly refer to films as video games, like in a negative sense. And, you could argue, well, that's insulting to video games because video games can do all this. But in terms of the action sequences and stuff, like, Top Gun is a video game of a movie because the bad guys are completely they're literally just fodder. Like that's all they're there for is for the lock-on cursor to hover over. You hear the tone, you have tone, you push the missile button and they blow up real good.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the choreography of the fight scenes, which are just aerial. Like they're just the way, and I found them so uninteresting. Whatever the film, I don't find them interesting. But I was thinking in the same way that people choreograph fight scenes, they're choreographing these planes and the action sequences. And I was like, oh, this is not I wish you gave us something more to hold on to give a shit when I'm just seeing planes in the sky that aren't even real or whatever.
I loved it in the same way that I love it when we see it in something like Star Wars, right? With the I think
it's better done in Star Wars.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I'm saying that, as an example of, an action set piece, I loved it. What I also, and this is a limitation in myself, when they start talking the pilot jibber jabber, I got 800 on here. They could have been talking. They could have been just speaking in tongues, as far as I'm concerned. All of those pages of dialogue of, someone on your tail, Charlie, 8x8, whatever. Just the fact that it was there, it took, listen, clearly I need to host a pro Top Gun special podcast just for the listeners who, like me, are like, yep, I recognize that everything you're saying is accurate about this film, but I still love it. So hit me up by DM. I will invite you to this exclusive pro Top Gun podcast that I'm going to be hosting, because I agree with absolutely everything you and Carol are saying. And yet it hit me. I can't deny it. I was affected.
It's because you really want someone to come and sing Lost That Loving Feeling to you randomly in a bar with backup music, as if that's not creepy.
That it was essentially, although it did remind me of the scene in Thor Ragnarok, Get Help, this.
Wait, what?
Whatever. Anyway.
What scene are you talking about?
In Thor Ragnarok, where Thor and Loki, are going back and forth and they're like, let's do Get Help. Oh, I hate doing Get Help. You remember that?
Vaguely.
Vaguely, yes.
Yeah, right. So it's the same setup for this. It's like she's lost that love and feeling. Has she really? I hate, this love and feeling.
I hate it when she does that.
Yeah, whatever. The thing we have not spent a lot of time talking about, but we must, is this sort of modern kind of re-envisioning of Top Gun as a quote-unquote gay film. Let's get into it. Anita, shall I read back to you all of your comments from when you were watching the show? Watching the movie.
This is so gay over and over again.
You're like, we gotta talk about it. And I was like, oh boy, someone just needs to read these.
One of the things that I love, so the Vidding community is a community, it's a specific kind of remix community that that started with women and is still primarily female run. They're very quiet and they tend to be a little more hidden online within their own communities because of copyright issues and that whole thing, although I would argue that it's all fair use. And I got into vidding through different kinds of subversive vids, and especially slash vids, which is when you take what are considered heterosexual characters in a piece of media and you pair them in queer relationships. There's some really, really good ones. Some of the more popular ones are ones that are trailers. So they're trailer remixes that are based on Brokeback Mountain. So there's a really good Harry Potter one. But there are a bunch of Top Gun ones because this is so it's so subtext, right? In the same way that in Point Break as well is so homoerotic. And I love the fan revisionings and recreations of what they're pulling out of the media, or what they're not getting from the media, or what they want to see more of in the media. And Top Gun is definitely like a one that this has been done with a lot.
Yeah, I had never noticed before this viewing of the film that during the volleyball scene where you have all these shirtless men, posing and
Okay, hold
everything.
on. Why is Tom Cruise wearing jeans to play volleyball?
He's probably shy about his leg. He probably has a stipulation in his contract that you never see his bare legs.
Sure, okay. Good
But
reason.
I never noticed that during that scene, the song that's playing is another Kenny Loggins song. It is called "Playing with the Boys."
Yep.
And here's a sample lyric from the song. Playing with the boys. I'll be staying playing with the boys. After chasing sunsets, one of life's simple joys is playing with the boys.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Sure is. Also, what was the one song that they played over and over and
Danger
over
Zone?
again?
Danger Zone?
Yes. God.
Danger
I was
Zone.
like, so we don't usually play the same songs again and again in movies now. Like, you use different songs.
Yeah.
But I forgot that in a bunch of 80s movies, you would play, like, it would be the theme song of the movie, and it would play multiple times in the movie. And I just kept being like, oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I want to say about the film before we wrap up is that I find super interesting about it is, so obviously Maverick is like the central character. Iceman is positioned as a kind of antagonistic figure throughout most of the film. And yet, everything that Iceman says throughout the whole movie to Maverick about how he's reckless, he's dangerous, he's a danger to himself and others, it is all 100% right.
Yep.
Iceman is totally right throughout this entire movie.
Yep.
But we're supposed to be like, Iceman's kind of an asshole. No, Iceman, I mean, yeah, maybe in some ways he is kind of an asshole, but not for like telling Maverick that he needs to fucking be more disciplined up there.
And everybody's like, oh, but you're so good and intuitive flying. And it's like, but he breaks all of the rules to get
and he's going to get somebody killed, he is inevitably. I wrote that note, I got a lot more love for Iceman this go round. As a kid, I absolutely, was happy with him being cast in the role of the villain in my understanding of the movie. But as an old woman, I was like, more people should be listening to Iceman. This kid has it figured out. Also, as I rewatched it this time, I remembered, because I have such a love for the Mission Impossible movies now, I had forgotten how much I used to hate Tom Cruise in the 80s. And I remembered as I watched this movie that this movie was the reason why. And it was because he was so good at playing this kind of cocky character. Like, I wrapped that up into an understanding of who Tom Cruise as a person was. And I was unable to see him in other things, but luckily for Tom Cruise, and I'm sure he sleeps better at night knowing that I enjoy his films now, Tom Cruise in his 50s, I just got a lot more time for than Tom Cruise in his 20s. Good for him.
All right. Well, watch it or don't watch it. I don't really give a shit.
Watch it and then talk to me. And listen,
yeah,
you want to
we'll
talk
leave
about
us a comment if you want to.
Absolutely. And let's talk about how this film, we should, it's absolutely needs to be talked about in conjunction with the film An Officer and a Gentleman. So watch that and then get at me. And then also let's talk about how Tony Scott made another film about the Navy, Crimson Tide, 10 years after Top Gun, which I think works to, I don't know, not undercut, but maybe complicate a lot of the messages that are in Top Gun. Yo, get at me. I want to talk about this movie some more.
Y'all got your homework.
Yeah.
Report to Professor Ebony.
Please do.
All right, it is time for What's Your Freak Out? Who wants to go first?
I always go first. Ebony, you can go first this time.
Okay, my freak out this week, and it's hilarious that I'm saying this week as if I didn't just deliver a freak out 50 minutes ago on something else.
Hey,
entirely.
don't show how the sausage is made.
We talked about how the sausage is made in the last episode.
No, we
Anita,
didn't.
people want to know about sausage, okay? And people, feel free to clip just that little bit that I just said and, use it all over
and
the
make your own
internet.
slash vid.
Exactly. So I am freaking out about the show Veep, which I've just been rewatching on Amazon. So this is the show with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and a bunch of other amazing comic actors about Selena Myers, who is when the show starts, she is the vice president of the United States, and she is briefly the president of the United States. It is a searing, hilarious political comedy from Armando Iannucci, and he is the dude who was responsible for The Thick of It, which is an amazing, searing, hilarious political comedy set in the UK. I just started rewatching it because I was feeling sad about Peter Capaldi not being Doctor Who anymore. Peter Capaldi, famous as Malcolm Tucker in The Thick of It, which led me back to Veep. This show is so incredibly smart. And one of the things that I love about it is the way that Julia Louis-Dreyfus so deftly constructs a character who is both often smarter than everyone else in the room, but also just incredibly ignorant at times and so self-absorbed. I both love her and despise her in equal measure. And I think it's a pretty, it's a tough needle to thread with these kind of characters. And it almost never happens with female characters that we're allowed to see them in that kind of depth and three-dimensionality. She's not at all someone that you want to emulate. And yet she can be just so devastating with her incisiveness and her character assassination sometimes. I don't know. If you haven't checked out Veep, I encourage you to. You can stream it on Amazon Prime. As Anita says, it's fake free. Like if you pay for Amazon Prime, you don't have to pay again to watch it. So check it out.
Cool.
All right. My freak out this week is
Spider-Man.
Episode... What?
Is it Spider-Man?
No, I'm done with Spider-Man. No more Spider-Man, at least until if there's some amazing DLC. But hopefully there will be some DLC where you play as Miles Morales as Spider-Man. But anyway.
Does Miles Morales show up in the... Did you talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, he's a supporting character.
Right.
Please
ignore cut all that out.
But my freak out this week is episode 1 of Life is Strange 2. It's a completely new story. Basically, it's in the same universe as Life is Strange 1, but it focuses on completely different characters. And so it focuses on the Diaz brothers. You play as a character named Sean Diaz, who is, I think, 16-ish, and who has to go on the run with his younger brother Daniel after an incident occurs involving police violence. So they live in Seattle or the Seattle area, and after their father is killed by a cop for no reason whatsoever, they go on the run. And of course, I appreciate the relationship between the brothers. Sean at times is kind of rude, to Daniel. He gets tired of Daniel the way that older siblings often get tired of their younger siblings. And I actually sort of appreciate that Sean isn't always completely likable. You sometimes are like, oh, I wish he would be a little nicer to Daniel. But also you kind of understand that, older siblings don't always make the best decisions in how they treat their younger siblings, right? They're not always as patient as they should be or whatever. But, I also appreciate that the game is definitely acknowledging factors of race. It's acknowledging Trump. It's acknowledging that the Diaz brothers live in Trump's America, and that affects things that they experience on their journey. And I was just sort of pleasantly surprised to see the game really acknowledge that stuff. so as directly as it does. It's hard to say, of course, given that there's only one episode out of 5 out yet, like whether the entire experience will be worthwhile, whether it will end up being good or great or what have you. But I do feel like it's a promising start. And, if you're into narrative games at all, I encourage you to take a chance on the first episode. You can buy it separately. You don't anywhere you go where you might buy it. You can either just buy the whole season right now for like $40, I think, or you can just buy this episode by itself, which should be like $8 or so. And so I encourage you to maybe just do that and give it a shot and see how you like it. I think it's doing some things that are worthwhile. Yeah.
Cool. You can also, we streamed it a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So you can check it out if you want to just get a feel for what it looks like on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/femfreak. All right. My freak out is a couple of books by an author named Porochista Kakpour. I just finished her latest book called Sick, a memoir, which I thought was very good. She has late stage Lyme disease and she's incredibly sick, but she spent most of her life being very, very, very sick, debilitatingly so, and never knew why, and was just failed repeatedly by the medical industry over and over and over again. And, I find that story very interesting, but also, she talks about how she was born in Iran and moved, because of the political climate as a child, moved to LA with her family. She's always wanted to be a writer. So she talks about that journey and how her illness sort of impedes that journey in some ways. She talks about drug addiction and just moving around a lot and how this illness has affected her relationships and how what it means and what it feels like to be sick forever. So I found it really intense and illuminating, and I highly recommend it. I don't think I ever freaked out about another book of hers that I read, which I meant to do, called The Last Illusion. So this is actually a novel. She's a novelist. And I really liked this book a lot. It was so different from a lot of other books. I know that sounds weird. I don't know. It was a very interesting story. So it's about a kid named Zal. So I remember in the book, it very specifically teaches you how to say his name. And I read it months ago. So I can't remember if it's Zal or Zal, but I think it's Zal, who grew up in a village in Iran. And he was basically raised as a bird, as a bird, like in a cage, not learning language, just extreme torture in that way. And he was rescued, but to come out of something that feral is really difficult. And so he ends up being moved to New York and being raised by this scientist to try to get him to be human again. And so it's the story of him trying to be human and do human things while still always wanting to be a bird. And what's so interesting about it is that she really taps into masculinity in this, because as he's sort of trying to perform being human, he's also performing what he views society deems as appropriate masculinity. And I think that is incredibly interesting. It's called The Last Illusion. Part of why it's called that is because he gets entangled with a famous illusionist, hoping to fly. So highly recommend both of these. We will link them in the bios, or we'll link them in the
show notes.
The show notes. All right. That's our show. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say in the last show notes, and I've already forgotten it in the last hour. What was it? I've forgotten. All right. Well, that's our show. My memory is as bad as it's always been, but you can catch us back here every single Wednesday. Stay tuned for the bonus episode, which is only available as a backer of this podcast, which you can be. So just head over to d.rip/femfreak. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and tell all of your friends when you're sitting around watching Top Gun and having debates about whether you like it or not. And you can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com and follow us on Twitter at femfreak to stay up to date on all the news. You can find me at Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
I am at Double Dip. That is my call sign.
Double dip. All right. That's complicated. Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. Technical support by Sarah Norales. Art by Jamie Varon. We'll see you next week.
Later.
Bye.